Fred, I know you did a lot of television. You also did some radio, very versatile in many ways. What was your story, as it were, before you started doing any broadcasting?
Right, well, go back to 1970. I'm a teacher in a boys' grammar school. I'd done a maths degree, and then I did a postgraduate teaching certificate, intending to become a teacher. And I'd done that at Coventry, got a job in a local boys' school, but I was also playing a bit of music with a kind of pop folk band at the time. I was playing a bit of drums and flute and mouth organ, this kind of thing. And we happened to play a gig with a band called the Strawbs, who were very big at the time, and they really liked what we were doing. So they said, would you like to be professional and perhaps we can record you and you might even be our support act? And we thought, this is great. So I handed in my notice, at which point the band fell apart. So I'm out of a job, and some friends of mine knew me from college, and I'd been in a few plays with them, and they said, how would you like to start a theatre company? We know you're out of work. And I thought, well, nothing to lose. So I became an actor, kind of on the rebound. We moved to Southampton, and a guy from Radio Solent came to interview us, and he asked us if we'd like to contribute to the local radio station. We couldn't really think of a way we could do that because, well, we did very few plays as such. We did a lot of participation stuff, and I couldn't see for the life of me how we could do that on the radio until I got talking with a friend of mine in the group, and she and I decided what we might do was write and perform a little adventure story for the kids on their weekend output, and then take it to a cliffhanger, and then the kids would write in and say what they wanted to happen next. The best idea won a book token, and we would write a skeleton script. We'd pop in the next week and record it, because we were quite used to ad-libbing, and take it to another cliffhanger. And so we started doing these adventures. So that was my very first experience of any broadcasting at all. In fact, to begin with, I'm absolutely terrified, but I soon grew to love studios, and I loved working with a little team, you know.
Had you done any acting at school?
Oh, I was third soldier in, in something or other, Julius Caesar, I think. Oh, and I once had to say, the light put out the stars in the school nativity. But there you go, that was it. But I always wanted to be an entertainer, I think. I remember that in primary school, we had a teacher who used to regularly pop out, I think, just to have a cigarette. And whenever he went out, he would say, Fred Harris, you come to the front of the class and tell them a story. And I would just make up a yarn about Goofy and Donald Duck and one of the teachers and a robot. And I don't know where these stories were coming from. I just to busk them and ad-lib them. And I quite liked the response I got. So I think there was always that frustrated performer in me.
So improvisation came in useful later, presumably.
It did, especially when I came on to do things like Play School, which, although it was scripted, they relied on you to find your own way of doing things. There was never any auto cue, so you had to do it more or less in your own words, unless you were telling a written story or doing a poem or something. But the rest of it was fairly off the cuff and casual.
Okay, so you started doing these things for radio. Did that lead to the idea of a job in radio?
Not really, because I was, by that time, I was running the theatre company. I was the kind of director. But I met somebody at the radio station who said, do you know, you'd be really good on a kids programme called Play School, which I knew a little bit about. I had seen, you know, Derek Griffiths doing mime as I walked past the radio rentals window. I thought, what the hell is this bloke doing? But he seems to be having fun. And one day when I was off sick, I turned the programme on at 4:00 and there's Play School. And I thought, what a great programme. So I wrote to, at this guy's suggestion, I wrote to the last name I saw on the credit, which was Cynthia Felgate. And I said, do you know, I think I might be able to do something for this programme, because I do funny voices and I can do a bit of mime and I play the flute and this kind of thing. And lo and behold, I got the job.
So you turned up for an interview, presumably, with Cynthia Felgate?
turned up for an interview, and then they gave me an outside audition at which I think they saw about 20 or 30 people. They shortlisted me, and they saw 6 of us. And on the studio day, I'd never seen a television studio, and I was totally overawed. I was mind-boggled. And we'd done a stagger through, and then we'd done a kind of rough rehearsal. Then we went out to be given notes before they did the take, and this is just of the audition. And a lady called Carol Chell, who was a producer and had been a presenter, she took me outside and she started giving me notes, and she said, "Oh, when you do this, can you remember to..." No, I won't tell you that. "Oh, when you do the... you know that item with the sock puppet? If you... No, I'll tell you... No, you do it your way." And I thought, what am I doing? And as we went in, she grabbed me by the shoulder and she said, "Fred, don't let me down. My money's on you." But that just felt great. That was exactly the right thing to do. She hadn't overloaded me with notes. She boosted my confidence, so much so that there was one point where I had to delve into a bag and pull out a sock. We're going to make a sock puppet. But the one I'd made was a black sock. Right, okay. So here's one I made earlier. So I delved in and I pulled out a red sock. And with the words, "All you need is an old sock." And I pulled out the wrong colour sock. So I thought, what do I do? And I sniffed it and said, "Oh, preferably a clean one," and threw it away. And I think that's what got me the job.
Oh, wonderful.
One of the sound engineers nearly fell off his boom at that point, and you could actually hear the chuckle on the tape. So I think that was what did it for me. That's how I got the job.
Where was that? Which studio? Do you remember?
Studio 7 at Television Centre.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
So the centre was already working. But I think you told me in a conversation we had on the phone or something that you did some work at Lime Grove. Is that right?
Yes. When I auditioned for Play School, there was one of the directors there, producer, Michael Cole, lovely guy, and he was looking for somebody to do a puppet show called Ragtime, which he was writing. And they auditioned me under the pretense of I was auditioning for Play School. But in fact, Michael Cole was really looking for someone for the puppet show. So when I did the sock puppet and then did some funny voices for them, he thought, "Oh, this is the guy I want." So he asked me to do this programme, which we recorded at Lime Grove. And I don't know why it is. Perhaps you could tell me, David. But Lime Grove, not being on the main building of the Beeb, it had a more relaxed atmosphere. You didn't feel there were people looking over your shoulder the whole time. And
It was a labyrinth, wasn't it?
Oh my God, wasn't it just?
Yeah.
It had a very good bar, though.
It had a very good bar.
Did you ever see the dressing rooms?
No, I didn't.
I've seen toilets that are bigger, and they all looked rather dank and sort of dark green. Horrible.
Now, you had this audition and you did the thing with the jokes and so on. So that led to, presumably, some kind of contract for you to do, what, a dozen programmes?
Well, no, we were ever, with Play School, we were only ever given a week at a time. So you were going to make 5 programmes, which you had to do in 2.5 days. So it was fairly intensive work. You would have 1 day outside rehearsal on the Friday. Then you'd have the Saturday and Sunday to go home, learn your lines. On the Monday morning, you'd come in, you'd do 2 programmes on the Monday, 2 programmes on the Tuesday, and 1 programme on the Wednesday, and you would finish at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So it was fairly intensive work, which is why they couldn't possibly expect you to be line perfect, which again is why they were quite happy for you to put it in your own words. But it was tough going.
But they had to run to time, so somebody was saying, "Hurry up, slow down."
Well, to begin with, they used to it was quite an expensive process to do an edit. So they liked to get, out of the 5 programmes, they liked to get 3 of them at least recorded in one go. So there was always that pressure to get it right or to busk your way out of it if something had gone wrong. And I'm glad to say that most of the time it worked.
Did you have some sort of talkback in your ear or what?
No, none of that. They wanted it to be as kind of natural and untelevision-y as possible. So you had no autocue, you had no talkback, you would have the floor manager would be giving you copious notes, and sometimes if the program was overrunning, you'd get a hasten up, the spinning hand that the floor managers always used to do. No, but it was very much seat of your pants.
How long were the programs?
25 minutes to begin with. Later they cut it down to 20 minutes. I'm not absolutely sure why.
How many weeks did you manage to get out of the BBC with that?
Oh, well,
or years?
It was years. I started in 1973, and you would make a week's worth of programmes, but there were about 8 other presenters of your gender that were cycled around. So you might only get 5 or 6 weeks in the year. It depends who was available and who was on holiday. So I think I did something like 700 programmes altogether. I didn't finish there until about 1988, which is just before Play School shut its doors for good.
Yes. Who else were your presenters? What other presenters were there?
Oh,
Floella.
Floella, yeah, I did Floella's first programme, and it was very funny really because Floella's quite dark and I'm quite pale. And in those days, television technology wasn't as slick as it is now, and they were having trouble balancing the two of us in the shot. And they were boosting the lights, in which case I looked like a ghost, or they were dimming the lights, in which case you couldn't see Flo's face because she was too dark. So in desperation, they sent me off to makeup to give me a bit of a tan, and then they could balance the faces. So fine, okay. A fortnight later, I met Floella in the Green Assembly, and by that time the programmes had gone out, and I said to her, "Oh, how did you like the programmes, Flo, when they went out?" And she said, "Oh, great." She said, "My mum," now I can't do a Jamaican accent, but she said, "My mum said to me, 'Who's that nice half-caste man you was working with?'" Her words, not mine.
Oh, brilliant.
But that was me, the nice half-caste man.
Yes. She was pioneering, really, wasn't she? Very early for an ethnic minority.
They did have a couple of black presenters before her. There was a man called Johnny Silvo. There was Derek.
Oh, Derek, of course, yes.
Who was absolutely brilliant. I idolised Derek.
Tell me about the studio day. I mean, what time did you turn up? How did it work?
The programme started, I think, staggering through at 10:30 in the morning, but I always used to get in there about half an hour or even an hour earlier, just to familiarise myself with it. I like to make myself feel comfortable. Just, I would go around and just speak some lines out, just so you get the sound of your own voice, and you just know the shape of the studio. I used to do that in other programmes as well. MicroLive, I would pop in early just to feel that you owned the place. Then you would stagger through and you would do a run through, which would be the half hour before lunch, probably about 12 o'clock you'd start that. I don't remember, to be absolutely honest.
So when you talk about a stagger through, I mean, it really was stop, start, stop, start.
Yes,
stop,
yes.
stop.
It was getting the cameras lined up, making sure that all the graphics were in the right order, and just running in the VT. Just get everybody familiar with the shape of the programme. Then you would dovetail it all together for the stagger through. Then you would go away and have your lunch, and then you would come back and do the take.
Right, hoping you hadn't forgotten it. Did you feel nervous when you started?
Terribly nervous, yes. I think most people, there's something wrong with you if you don't.
Yeah.
But actually what you've got to do is you've got to harness the nerves. You've got to make them work for you. There's a saying that later in my career, I used to teach people how to perform on television and how to cope with an interview and this kind of thing. And I would say you will be nervous, but the objective is, don't try to kill off the butterflies, try to make them fly in formation. Now, I wish I was the person that had thought of that. I don't know who it was, but that is exactly right. That's what you do. You welcome the nerves and you make them work for you.
Yeah. Now, were you working side by side with other presenters for a lot of the time? or was it always a
Only
one,
the
one over?
females. You would
Oh, you
have
would,
each
right.
week you would
Yeah,
have
male and female
one
together.
male, one female.
Yeah.
On odd occasions, you would get a guest star coming in, and it might have been a guest star like a well-known actor, but it might have been another presenter, another one of the presenters. So I did get to work with people like Derek Griffiths and Johnny Ball and Brian Camp, because they came in to play an extra role in the week that was really hosted by you and your sidekick.
Yeah. Now that was what years was that?
73 I started, and 88 Play School closed its doors.
That's a long time.
It is,
It's a long
yeah.
time.
I took time out in the middle. They changed the format of the programme. In about 1983, I think it was. ITV had suddenly started doing children's programmes. Before then, it had always done sort of afternoon quiz games or housewifey type of programmes, you know.
Yes.
And then suddenly they realised there's a children's market out there, and they started making kids programmes. And the BBC kind of overreacted. And there was a thinking at the time that if you grab the kids at 4 o'clock when they get in from school, you can keep them until 6 o'clock when the news comes on.
Yeah.
Well, that I think is just ridiculous, because by that stage these handsets had come in, and you could
Yes.
remote controls. You can start to flick to the channel you want. So I don't think that holds water.
Yeah.
But they decided that Play School had to change, and it had to grab a much wider audience. Now the beauty of Play School was intended for preschool children, so you knew exactly who was watching. You can assume they can't read, but they're interested in the world, and they're discovering how things work and this kind of thing. And they probably can't tell the time, so let's show them how the hands on a clock
Yeah.
work and this
Yeah.
kind of thing. But you can't have a 10-year-old entertained by the same stuff that's going to appeal to a 3-year-old. And they changed the whole format of Play School. It became more like a junior light entertainment program. They had stilt walkers and
Oh.
all kinds of strange things. And at the time, I'm afraid I made myself a bit unpopular by saying I didn't think this was a good idea. But the viewers seemed to agree with me, because the viewership, which had been 5 million per day, dropped to 2 million, then to 1 million, and down to 750,000. After that change, I had mums coming around to my front door and saying, "We've got a petition. Can you take this to the BBC and say, take Play School back to what it used to be?"
Wow.
And I said, "No, I can't. I
Oh,
can't
interesting.
possibly do that.
Yes.
I'll be putting my head in the noose.
Yes.
This is the person you send it to, but don't involve me."
Was it still being produced or edited by the same production team?
It was. They brought in a whole new army of presenters, or about half a dozen new presenters. And the older presenters like myself started to be used more in the guest capacity. We would come in to tell a story and this kind of thing. So for about 3 years, I didn't present a whole week of Play School.
Right.
I would just come in and do odd bits and pieces. Well, it was fine in a way, because by then I was doing other stuff for other channels. But I do wish they hadn't messed about with the format.
Yeah.
Later they started to move the format back to what it had been, but by then it was a bit too late. I think that's the reason they cut Play School down from 25 minutes to 20.
Yes.
Make it easier to do
Really,
with
yes.
the new format.
It was Play School that had the through the round window, through the square
That's
window,
right,
isn't that
yes,
right?
Yes.
That
And
was
my
good.
son used to read my scripts, so he knew that on Wednesday it's through the square window. So for a couple of sweeties at school, he would sell this information to his friends, who could then go home and say, "Oh, I'll bet it's the square window today."
Oh, brilliant. You say you were working for other television companies, so you could do that as a freelance, presumably. You could just do what you want, I imagine, so long as you turned up to do what you were contracted to do. So did you do ITV?
Yes, I did quite a few things for ITV, mainly education programmes. Play School was never counted as an education. That was a preschool program. In fact, they used to reject anything that was too, inverted commas, educational.
Yes.
But I wrote to a guy at ATV in Birmingham saying, I've got a maths degree. If you ever need a maths or science presenter, please think about me.
Right.
And I got 2 letters back. The first one said, oh yes, we put your letter on file, but there's no openings at the moment. And by the next post I got one saying, come up on Tuesday, we need you now.
For which company?
That was ATV, which later became Central.
What was the program?
It was a program called Figure It Out, which was quite a zany kind of program, but they did do a lot of things that I enjoyed doing. They used chroma key, CSO we used to call it at the BBC.
Yes.
Chroma key was just coming in, they were making full use of this, and I was quite used to it from having done the puppet show Ragtime, because we used that a lot. And I got to play silly characters and do sketches and things, as well as it being a bit of serious maths tuition. But it was a very light-hearted, because at the time the science and maths programs that were being put out were rather turgid, but the programs for English or languages were quite exciting. And then ATV had decided, let's do something exciting and fun with the sciences, and
Right.
I was very pleased to be in on the ground floor of that.
So you could have been Johnny Ball, as it were.
Well, as it were, yes. In fact, it's a shame Johnny Ball came up with Think of a Number, because I had an idea for a program called Harris in Numberland, which I wanted to tout around, but by the time Johnny Ball had done his, I thought, I can't do that now. But I thought that was quite a nice title.
That is nice, yeah. So backwards and forwards between Television Centre and ATV, and then shortly after the beginning of the 80s, the BBC started doing its programmes about computers. Were you aware of those when they started?
Yes, I was, because how that impacted on me was there was a lovely lady called Terry Marsh who was seconded onto Play School as a director.
Oh.
And Terry was a researcher within the BBC. And at the time, Play School wasn't terribly good with the sciences. They would ask the children to do things like decide, is this an animal or a bird? Now, as a scientist, that makes me grimace. And I had to sort of make myself unpopular by saying, animal, birds are animals. And and Terry did some great programs where they got the sciences right, which was really good. But she also did some research on a radio program I was doing, which is called Introducing Science. And I'd gone to my producer and said, can we not do something with computers? Because the whole computer in education thrust had
was
come
beginning
in.
to take off, yes.
Computers in schools, and you could have a BBC Micro or a Spectrum or a RML, was it called?
Yes.
And I sold this idea to my producer that we could do something where we could have the computer software and the voice which came out of the radio, which could be taped, and you could synchronize the two together involving the child, that the child would press the button, and you could have all the graphics on the computer monitor and the instructions on because in those days you didn't have so many floppy disks or CD-ROMs or any of that. It all had to be done through tape, which was quite complicated. But I thought I'd found a way of doing it where you get the child to synchronize it. Anyway, when the BBC launched this, Terry came along to the launch, and she knew that I was involved in computers and had done this, and invited me to guest on Play School to review some software, because I'd written some, or I designed some software for BBC. And so I did a software review on one program, and then a few months later, I'd been up all night writing a science radio script for a program called Introducing Science. And at 7 o'clock I'd gone to bed, And at 8 o'clock the phone rang, and a little voice said, "Fred, are you free today?" And I said, "Yes, what is it?" And she said, "Leslie Judd's not very well, and we're doing MicroLive from a place called Martlesham," which I'd never heard of. She said, "Can you get on a train to Ipswich and come out and fill in for Leslie?" And I said, "God knows what time I can be there." And she said, we've checked that out. You can be here by 2.
Martlesham is the headquarters of BT.
That's correct. Yes. And
So this was an outside broadcast.
it was an outside broadcast for MicroLive. And I'd had no sleep. I got on the train, and the train is stuck in snow because it was, I think, in the February. I got there late. The auto cue girl didn't get in till even later, and I was presented with Leslie's script. Now, Leslie, I love her to bits, but she has a way of speaking.
From Blue Peter, originally.
From Blue Peter,
yes.
That's right. And she was a delight. Absolutely love Leslie. But the way she liked to write her sentences, she liked to write in a kind of journalese, because I think she wasn't terribly confident about computers, so she would give herself slick phrases that made her seem more confident. Now, one of the phrases I remember, she said about a monitor, "This is a very nifty British product." Now, I don't speak like that at all, and I thought, right, I've got to change that. And I went through my script on the paper, and I'm making all the changes that I will ask the autocue girl to do when she eventually arrives. When eventually she got there, only I think an hour or just more than an hour before transmission.
Oh, this was live.
It was live, of course. It was live. And my co-presenter, Mac, went rushing over to the autocue girl and said, "Oh, these are the changes I want you to make." And I thought, oh, we'll never get through the reams that I've got. So I had to go up to her and say, "Look, just try to follow me. I'll try to stick with more or less what's down here, but it'll all be changed." So, for example, "This is a very nifty British product" became "very nifty idea, and the great news is it's British," which is much more my kind of style. Yeah. And bless her, the autocue girl was able to keep up with me, which is brilliant.
Now, that programme was live, I think, in the early evening, BBC Two, is that right?
That's right, yes.
And it went on for many years.
I joined in 85 for the very first programme I did with Terry Marsh as the software reviewer, but this is early in 86. And I think it went on till 89, something like that.
Yes, and won lots of awards.
It did, yes.
It was very
quite
good.
Rightly too.
Yes, quite rightly. Now, it was a very different kettle of fish from Play School. So what was the studio like for that?
Well, it was live for one thing, which was great, because, to be honest, I had started, you see, because having done things like Play School from 1973, this is now 85, 86, I'm just starting to get a little bit tired of people asking for more of the same. I get bored rather easily, and when people only want you to repeat what you did last time, that's death. And then suddenly live television came along, which was just brilliant, because your heart's beating 19 to the dozen, and you're juggling on a tightrope. You don't know what's going to happen. And in fact, some wonderful moments came out of it. I can remember there was one program we did on MicroLive where we were just showing how email works. And all we were doing was, Mac and I were sending emails to each other across the studio. But we're doing it for real. We're doing it via the BT line. So I type something to Mac. It goes through BT, goes through the network, comes out on his monitor. He replies to me. Everything's going fine until the transmission. Now, what we didn't know was that BT were going to do what they call clean the line, which is a way of, I don't know how they do it. They wipe all the glitches they isolate one part of the network and they reroute everything through another part of the network.
Right.
So they're cleaning the line in London, which is where my emails were going to Max and his to me, and they're rerouting it through Birmingham, which is quite a lot further, I think you'll agree.
Yes.
So by the time Mac has written, "Can I meet you in the office at 7 tomorrow?" That's gone up to Birmingham and come back, and it's come back as "Can not with flat 3/4, and it's a list I'm off." And here we are live, and all day long it's been behaving itself. Suddenly we're live with this gobbledygook coming out. And I thought, what do I do? Because the viewer can see it, and I can see it. So I turned to camera and I said, I can't remember exactly the words, I said, "Well, people often ask me, is this programme really live? What do you think?"
Oh, brilliant. Brilliant. That's a terrifying sort of moment. But Mac was quite good, I think, wasn't he, at sort of dealing with things if they went wrong.
He had a wonderful manner about him, did Mac. Yes, I can't remember many other things that went wrong. Oh, except one fateful day. We had rehearsed the programme and discovered that it was about 5 minutes too long. So we decided it would be life by 1,000 cuts. So odd sentences were sliced here and there. And I was doing a review of, I don't know, it was a new computer system, and I'd shown some of the chips inside, and I was showing the new monitor and this kind of thing. And we decided, right, let's cut the monitor bit. That's less important. Let's just concentrate on the computer chips. So we'd done all these things to save time. Now, live program comes out, and I'm doing the hellos and everything, and I notice a sentence coming up the auto cue. Now, this was called a teleprompter, and it was a digiprompt, which means the words were like on a computer monitor in front of my face. Mm-hmm. In the old days, the auto cue used to be on a paper strip. So if I veered away from the script, the auto cue girl could look down and see where I'd gone to. Because the paper was spooled around across her knees, so she could think, oh, he's gone 2 paragraphs down, I'll spool up to reach it.
Yes.
But of course, with a digiprompt, the words don't exist until they're on the screen. So I saw a sentence coming through, and I'm thinking, I'm sure we cut that. Oh no, I'll bet the producer has gone and reinstated it and not bothered to tell me.
Yes.
And then another sentence came through which I knew we'd cut, and I thought, oh no, she's loaded up the wrong disk. What are we going to do? So Mac, every time we hand it over to Mac is happily going through all the bits, including the bits that have been cut. So the program is spreading. And I thought, right, I've got to cut all the bits that we cut before, and I've got to cut some other bits as well. Otherwise we'll crash into the news at the end of the program, or whatever the next program was. Yes. So I'm compressing what I'm doing. I'm speaking faster, and I speak fast anyway. I'm speaking faster, I'm compressing what we're doing, and the poor auto cue girl is thinking, where the hell is he? And she's spooling the words up and down, and in front of my face, I've got this gobbledygook and blah, 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 you know, these words are just zipping by, and I'm trying to look calm and collected and stick to the script as best I could.
How funny.
Until we got onto a piece of film, and then I was able to rush across and say, you've got the wrong script on. So she was able to change the disc, and we were back on course. But that was Brown Trousers Television. That was the hairiest moment I think I've ever had.
Never worked with children, animals, or computers. But did you ever have anything go wrong where, in a sense, I mean, I can understand why that went wrong. That was a question of the running order being too long and things like that. But did you have computers actually failing on air?
Oh, I'm sure we must have done. Because, I mean, the whole purpose of MicroLive was people had complained about the earlier programs because they had said, oh, it's all very well you doing this on television, but when I'm using my computer, it crashes. And so the ethos of MicroLive, well, we'll show them
Yeah.
They do crash, and you just have to cope with it. I can't remember any incidents where the computers actually totally crashed on us.
But that's the sort of program, rather like Tomorrow's World, where presumably you rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed, possibly the day before, or was it always on the day of the studio?
There was an outside rehearsal day. To be honest, in my dotage, I can't remember whether it was the day before or a couple of days before. But we had outside rehearsal days, which sometimes went on way into the evening because an item had turned out to be rather more difficult than we'd expected, or the software needed a little bit of tweaking. Sometimes we even used to rehearse around at my house. I very often used to do things about the home computers. Mac was very good on business computers because that was his day-to-day job. I was more the enthusiast, and I would do things about the Spectrum or the Commodore 64 or something like this. So very often, instead of dragging my computer and all my kids' software into the Beeb, they would come to me and we'd just rehearse them in my front room.
Right.
It was weekly on a Friday, and I can't remember how many programs we had in each series, but at least 10, probably 12. There were about 4 producers, and of course there were PAs and auxiliary staff. And there was a wonderful guy called Steve Lowry who was the techie, and this guy was absolutely brilliant because not only could he jack up all the computers, but he would even write the software. If we needed a piece of software that showed how this connects with that and how information is sent along the bus from here to there, not by the bus, I mean the computer bus,
Yes.
not the number 73. But he would write the software to do that, which was absolutely great.
So you were running software in the program,
On
which
the BBC,
which he had written.
Yes, on the BBC Micro.
Yes, yes. What else can we? Oh, yeah, well, other things you had to do, whether you were in MicroLive or whether you were doing Play School, of course. Things like makeup, costume. Well, not costume so much. Presumably you didn't have to use costume in Play School, did you?
No,
you turned
just
up in your own clothes.
Turn up in your own clothes, and I can remember putting in my tax returns. I had claimed for jeans because at that stage I didn't normally wear jeans, but on Play School you had to wear jeans because you're crawling around on the floor, and the floor was painted, so inevitably you would get paint on your jeans and you didn't want to use your decent trousers. And I can remember somebody, a taxman, saying, you can't claim for these jeans. And I said, yes, I can. It's my costume.
Yes, indeed. But what about makeup?
Yeah, I think if you don't have makeup, you look quite ill on television, or at least you certainly did in those days. And so you would always have to have some kind of makeup, a foundation or just a powder. And of course, if you go out filming, you don't have a makeup artist coming out, or then you need location catering and all the rest of it. There's a limit to how many people you can take out. So I would just take a little, what do they call them? A foundation pad, like a
compact.
A compact, yes, and make myself up that way. It's just to make the skin look a bit less shiny and a bit more the same colour all over.
Were you doing much location filming then?
We did quite a bit, but I was also doing other stuff as well. I was doing commercials, and I was also doing some filming for the ITV companies. I was involved in a comedy show as well, which did a lot of stuff on film. Oh, and then, of course, you did have makeup artists and costume people and so on. But yes, there was quite a bit of filming.
Did it make you feel different if you'd been made up? I mean, it's like an artist, like an actor would feel completely different once in costume.
I think it does, but it's helpful because now here's the thing: a lot of people imagine that being on television is a bit like being a microscope slide and somebody's looking at you and everything about it is exaggerated. In fact, the very opposite is true. Television and radio both have a flattening effect, and that comes as a real surprise to people. I've talked to people, members of the public who've seen themselves on television and thought, oh, I came across as a pale shadow of the real me. And what a lot of people don't understand, although it's becoming less the case these days because people are used to using Zoom and Skype and this kind of thing. Now they're used to appearing in front of a camera. But when we're going back to the 80s and 90s, people weren't used to that. And you have to up your energy level because the media takes away about 30% of your oomph.
Yes.
And to come out of the television at life size, you've got to put that extra 30% in at source.
But not nearly as much as you would if you were on the stage.
Oh, of course, yes. In fact, when I did my very early programmes for Play School, I'd been used to performing on a stage, and I found that some of my movements were far too big for the screen. If you want to say, I can remember one moment when I said, and he's over there, and I did a big point with my hand, which was too theatrical a gesture.
Yes.
All I needed to do was say, and he's over there, and just look with my eyes, and that would do it.
That's interesting, isn't it? The old thing about if you're on the radio, you're talking to one person. It's almost as if television is more than that.
I don't know that I agree with that. I think it's a good idea to think that you are talking to one person on television. I think radio is more intimate because you can carry a radio with you, you can listen to radio in the bath. Radio can be right up against your ear. And television is, yes, in one corner of the room.
Yes,
but I still think it's a very good idea to be thinking about that one person. I can remember seeing a children's programme which started off with presenter comes on and looks at the camera and says, "Hello, you lot." And I thought, that's awful, because you can't assume that there's a lot of people in the room. The child is sitting there and thinking,
right.
Who does she mean, you
Yes,
lot? There's
yes,
only
yes.
me.
Yes,
Whereas
yes.
if you come out and say, hello, or, how are you today, or whatever, that can be a singular, that can be an individual.
Yeah.
I reckon that all presenters ought to start doing children's programmes because it forces you into a good habit. You should never talk down to a child. That was instilled on us on Play School, and it echoed with me immediately when they told me that. But always treat the child as if they've got good intelligence but limited knowledge.
Yes.
And I think that's a golden rule for presenting any television programme.
Yes.
You can't assume that your viewer will understand what you mean by...
Don't underestimate their intelligence, but don't overestimate their
knowledge. Exactly right. And children's television is a very good grounding in that. But it applies at all levels, unless perhaps you're doing Open University.
Yes.
But even then,
yes,
the viewer might not have your knowledge.
Did your mathematical background originally make doing MicroLive much easier?
I think it did, in that because I was into maths, I was also into the sciences. I was also very fascinated by computers. When I went to training college, I got my first chance to write a computer program, which was in a language called Fortran. And I thought, what do I want to do? I know, I'd like to write a program to generate pi to 30 decimal places. So I wrote my very first computer program, sent it off to the college, and they sent it back and said, "We've calculated this will take 10 weeks to run."
Good Lord.
So,
right. Now, you've done a lot of radio as well, and radio comedy, so that sounds extremely interesting and full of entertaining stories. Let's hear a bit more about that.
I'll tell you how I got into radio comedy.
Yeah.
In the early 70s, I was doing a lot of voice work for things like cartoons and adverts. And I met a guy called Ron Bagley, who was a very well known at the time radio actor from Men from the Ministry and other hit radio comedy programs. And I said to him, Ron, I'd love to get into radio comedy. How do you do it? And he said, well, why did you write to Teddy Taylor, who was one of the executive producers on radio comedy? So I wrote to this man, Teddy Taylor, and he invited me up to speak to him. Well, it was an exercise in humiliation, because he sat me in his office and he asked me to do a couple of character voices. And he said, well, what you've got to understand, Mr. And he looked at my CVS, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Haggis.
Mr. Haggis. Mr. Fried Haggis. He says that the radio listener likes to hear voices they already know. They like to hear celebrities. They like to hear people they know. And unfortunately, you're a total unknown, and that's counting against you. He said, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take you next door to a young man who's got a project lined up and see what he thinks. But you've got to recognise that you are a total unknown. He taps on the next door and he says, oh, Simon, opened the door to Mr. Simon Brett. Oh. Simon Brett looks up and he said, Fred Harris. That was a wonderful moment. And what had happened?
Yes.
Simon had been off sick the week before. He had a young kid. They turned on Play School, and he'd seen me doing a story where I'm playing a dotty old clockmaker. He has a silly voice like that. And he'd said to his wife, that guy's got an ear for comedy.
Yes.
And the following week, he recognised me and said, Teddy Taylor slunk off. It was brilliant. But that's good. And he was setting up a programme called the Burkus Way. And I'd never done any radio comedy. And I thought he only wanted me to come in and do one programme or perhaps one voice in the programme. But no, he wanted me to be part of the team. There were 4 of us and do lots of voices. And it went on for, I think, something like 5 years.
I think it's still being repeated.
They're still repeating it on Radio 4 Extra.
Yes.
And I get about threepence halfpenny for every programme.
Oh. Who were the other actors in that?
To begin with, Denise Coffey, who was wonderful, wonderful, very funny lady. Nigel Reese, who presented quote unquote for many years.
Yes, that's right.
Now, Nigel, he used to take the mickey out of himself. He used to call himself Nigel Grease, and he would do this very smarmy sort of delivery, which was just heightening what he did on quote unquote. There was a mimic called Chris Emmett, lovely guy, comedian, did a lot of work with Roy Hudd.
Yes.
And later, because Denise Coffey had to move on and do something else at the Old Vic, I think, or the Young Vic. And Joe Kendall came in to replace Denise Coffey. Joe Kendall from, I'm sorry, I'll read that again.
And this was done in front of a studio audience?
Yes, at the Paris studios, which was in Lower Regent Street.
Where the Goon shows were made.
That's right, yes.
Wonderful.
It's sadly closed now, but that was good.
Yes. That must have been a very, very different sort of atmosphere. You've got an audience laughing at you and so on and so forth. You hope they're laughing with you rather than at you.
Yes.
How long did that go on for?
The Burkus Way, I think there were something like 55 programmes altogether. So probably 5 series. I can't remember offhand. But it was great fun because we used to do our own warm-up with the audience. Some comedy programmes have a warm-up man who comes on and tells a few jokes and says, welcome to the BBC, this is the BBC and you're welcome to it. You know, it's the usual starting line.
Yes.
We would do our own
your own warm-up. Mm-hmm.
And what we would do was, I had a technique. I used to say to the audience, oh, by the way, we are looking for a sound effect, which we couldn't find. We've been looking through the BBC archives to find it, and we cannot find it. So we would like you to help us, please, if you wouldn't mind. Later in the sketch, we have battery chickens that have been programmed to or genetically engineered to lay square eggs. So could you all please make the noise of chickens laying square eggs? And we would get the audience, 150 people all making these noises. Yes. Of course, it never featured. It was I was lying through my teeth, but it was a very good warm-up because it broke the ice and everybody.
There are endless jokes you can make. That was exactly what we wanted, sort of thing.
Yes, but we drew the line.
Stop cracking yolks. That's quite, yes. Right. So now, was that all the comedy you did, or did you do different ones?
I did radio comedy. I did quite a few. There was a thing with Jimmy Edwards. There was a thing with Alfred Marks.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember Alfred Marks?
Yes, I do.
And the very wonderful Miriam Margulies was in that program.
Wonderful, yes.
Oh, brilliant woman. I could tell you some stories about that, but they wouldn't be broadcastable.
Yes.
She was outrageous.
Yes. Well, she still is. She's still around.
Exactly.
And, yes.
Exactly right.
Yes.
There was a program. I managed to work with Roy Hurd on a program called Hoodwinks.
Now, he went on for years.
He did, yes. And that program won an award. It was the Pi Radio Award.
Right.
For the best use of comedy. What is the use of comedy? Comedy's supposed to make you laugh, isn't it?
Yes, it's quite. Well, perhaps it. What do you think of modern comedy? Because it's changed hugely.
It has. I think it went through a bad patch where I didn't identify with it. The haranguing the audience, and Alexei Sale used to do that a lot. And actually, Alexei Sale is a very funny man.
Yes.
But he went through this shout at the audience, and I didn't identify with that at all.
No.
But I do like the way comedy has gone now, where there's a lot more improvisation in it. I love rather than the stand-up comedy, I love the "Have I Got News for You," where there's interchange and off-the-cuff remarks.
And it's probably structured, isn't it? And they've presumably got certain exchanges between them that they practiced.
They practice, and they've got their. I mean, if you look at Lee Mack and David Mitchell, they've got their personas really well worked out.
Yeah.
But they are still within that able to improvise, and Lee Mack comes out with something very quick, and then David will come back with something even quicker and slicker. It's brilliant. I love all that.
But we've lost scripted comedy.
We have a bit, yes.
And you think of the best scripted comedy, like Blackadder, for example, or, well, I suppose Fawlty Towers, that sort of thing, which was very much the 80s, wasn't it? Yes, Minister.
Yeah.
Very sophisticated.
Yes.
Witty. Wit seems to have disappeared.
That's true. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think these things are cyclical, and perhaps that will come back. I used to love, when I was a kid, I used to love listening to The Goon Show, and I used to love listening to Round the Horn.
Yes.
I mentioned earlier a program that I wrote for radio, which was called Introducing Science. And the way that came about was I bumped into a writer who knew that I had a science background, and he said, Arthur Viles is looking for somebody to devise and write a new schools program for him, because at the moment the science program he's got is too open-ended. It's called Discovery, and the teachers are not using it because they feel too vulnerable, because it's posing questions which the teachers in the primary schools can't answer. He's looking for something that's more didactic and gives all the answers. And I was challenged by this guy, Arthur Viles, can you write a program that the kids will want to listen to? And I thought, what does radio do really well? And I thought of Round the Horn, which had a warm, cuddly host and this periphery of buffoons and idiots.
Yes.
And I thought, I wonder if you can do science, school science with that. So we had two presenters, myself and a woman called Carol Leader, also happened to be on Play School. And between us, with one other actor, we played these strange characters that came in. Professor Hans Niesenbumser, Yeah, that is me. Hello, boils and gherkins. Welcome. You know, and David Attencote. And other, lunatic characters would come into this program, and the children actually enjoyed listening to it because it was funny. But I borrowed the whole idea, stole the whole idea from Round the Horn, and I'd love there to be more comedy these days like that. I did a lot of voiceover work. We used to do in play school. We used to do a commentary on pieces of film. Through the round windows today, you can see blah 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 blah, and then we would do the commentary for that. So I got used to doing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then we would have to dub film for programs like MicroLive.
Yeah.
And on occasion, I was asked to do post-sync dubbing, where you would try to lip sync to the actor that was on the screen in front of you, and that was quite a challenge. I can remember one occasion my agent said to me, she phoned me up and said, "Can you get out to Elstree this afternoon? Got a job for you on a Fellini film." What, thinks I? All they wanted me to do was put some voices onto this Fellini film, which I have seen, but I've never heard my own voice. But I've never been able to find the English language dubbed version of it. It was a film called And the Ship Sailed On. I was sent out to Elstree. The guy said, "Oh, great," he said. "You look just like the character I want you to dub, because you've got a big nose." Yeah, thanks. Okay, so I had to dub this barman. And then he said, "Oh, can you do a couple of voices for sailors? Oh, and can you do an old man?" So I did a few of these voices, and he liked what I was doing, which was nice. And before I left, he said, "Tell me, have you ever worked with the band?" Now, I thought he said, "Have you ever worked with a band?" Because we did it all the time in play school and play away. And I said, yeah, of course I have, all the time. So he said, "Oh, great." And then he gave me an address, and he said, "Be there at 2 o'clock on Tuesday." And it was out at, I can't remember which studios it was. But anyway, studios west of London. I went out there. I want to remember the studios because I'm annoyed with myself.
Take your time, plenty of time.
What are the big studios, the big film studios?
Well, not Elstree, obviously.
No,
out in Denham Studios.
No, it wasn't Denham. Doesn't matter. Okay, so he gave me this address. He said, "Can you be there at 2 o'clock on Tuesday?" So I turned up to do this voiceover, this dub, and they showed me into a room which had a couple of rows of chairs and a dubbing, a cubicle at the back with a microphone. And I'm thinking, where's this band? What I didn't realise was the band was a system that they used to have in the old days before computers, which would help you get lip sync onto a film. What would happen was, if the foreign film had people's lips in vision, you can always tell when they meet. So the M's and P's and B's, the plosives, they have to match up with the English translation. So some clever PA or secretary would have gone through the script and written out the words that you have to speak in such a way that every time you hit a letter P, you match up with the person on screen. And the way this was done was by projecting a band of words which was projected across the wall underneath the screen, and there's a cursor in the middle. So if it says, "Oh, please come here and help," then the word, the P of please would be there, and the P of help would match up at exactly the moment that the character on screen, his lips went together. Now, I'd never seen this before, but I thought, oh my God, in for a penny. I've just got to pretend I can do it.
I'd never heard of that.
No, I don't think, well, obviously they don't use it anymore. And I had to do a pirate. I thought, what do I do? Either I've got to trust the words that they've been done absolutely correctly, or I've got to look at the character on screen and try to lip sync with him. And I thought, well, the whole purpose of this is the band is supposed to do the hard work for me. So I just read the script across as the words came through.
Yes.
And then the guy said, "Yeah, let's have a look." And he played it back. And it was uncanny because there's this pirate on screen up in the rigging
Yes.
speaking in my voice, and it's perfect. And you think, wow, fantastic. And it was
No.
nothing to do with my skills. It was just the technology. It was wonderful. The other one that I mentioned, the Fellini film,
Yes.
Fellini had recorded the whole thing without sound, which is mad,
Yes.
because he had an international cast. So he had engineered it in such a way that he knew it was going to be dubbed into every conceivable language. But he'd shot it so that very often the person who was speaking, you were looking at reaction shots over that person's shoulder. So you didn't have the lip sync problems, which was a peculiar thing. And it's worth looking at the film just to see how cleverly he's done that. But as I say, I've never been able to find the English dub version of that. Well, this one is And the Ship Sailed On.
When you finished the BBC work, did you go on doing a lot of sort of voiceovers and things like that, or commercials, or?
I did for a bit. The telly work started to dry up in the early 90s, and I think the reason for that is, do you remember that the ITV companies had to start bidding for the franchises?
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes.
And I think that was that not also the time when the BBC was undergoing a lot of internal changes? John
Producer
Burst and so
choice.
on.
Yes.
Yes, and there were massive cutbacks.
Yeah.
And as an example of this, a programme I used to make for Central Television, which had 3 in-vision presenters, the programme that followed on from that had only 1 presenter to save money, and that presenter was out of vision, which meant it was just a voiceover fee, it was not an in-vision fee. So they were saving massively. About 5/6 of their budget was saved by doing that. Fortunately, I was the guy that did the voiceover, but even so, it meant that for presenters, times were really hard. I spoke to a BBC booker at around that stage, and she said the knock-on effect of this is that I can get any star I want for about 1/3 of what I was paying him or her a couple of years ago.
Really?
I can get big name stars on the cheap now because work is so short.
Because it's short. Yes.
I was lucky because thanks to Leslie Judd, dear old Leslie, I'd started getting involved in television training, both media skills training for business people, and television training for BBC television training. So I was training new directors, sometimes new presenters. And in fact, there was one occasion I'd applied for a job on a well-known science programme, and I hadn't even been shortlisted. But the following week, I was phoned up. Could I train the person that had got the job? That hurt. That really hurt.
Yes.
But
yes.
I did get involved in television training.
Yes.
which
At Elstree, was it?
At Elstree, yes, Borehamwood, yes.
Yes,
and,
yes.
I thoroughly enjoyed that.
So tell me about TV training in Elstree. What sorts of things were you doing with them?
All kinds of things. Because I've dabbled in lots of different areas. I've done I've done film, I've done studio, I've done live, I've done pre-recorded radio and television, and kids programs and adult and this kind of thing. It was a wide, not a very in-depth career, but a very wide-ranging career. So I was quite a useful character for them because I could go out for the day and they could send me off on 4 or 5 different film shoots, and they would each be totally different. And you had to fly by the seat of your pants, but that was all right. I love all that.
So you were a trainer.
I was.
But were you also there as an artist if they needed somebody?
I was there, and initially I was there as a presenter. And like I say, you never know what you were going to do next. I flew a plane once. Literally. I'm out at Elstree Aerodrome, and I had about 6 different directors, and they only give you 3/4 of an hour each. I interview the air traffic controller. That's one of the directors sorted, and all day long they're teasing me. They're saying, "You're taking that plane up after lunch?" And I say, "Oh yeah, sure I am, yeah." But literally after lunch, they put me in the plane with a pilot instructor.
Yes.
And he said, "Look, don't panic, Fred. I'm going to do the dodgy bits. I will take us off. I will land us. But once we're up in the sky, over to you." So I flew this light aircraft, and I'm narrating. I'm doing there's a camera behind me,
right,
and I'm mic'd up with a throat mic, and I'm saying, "Well, this is absolutely unbelievable. This, and the view over there is fantastic. I can even see what I parked my car," etc., etc. We came down and immediately we wanted to see the take back again.
Yeah.
So jack up the monitor, put it on, and what you hear is so a lesson learned for all of us.
I hope this recording isn't like that. I think that's lovely.
When I was doing the kids' programmes, we always got sent out at weekends. We were always asked by the mums and dads to open the fate. And I would get sent out to different parts of the country to open fates here and there. And I never charged anything for it, which was madness really, because they later discovered everybody did. There was a going rate for the Blue Peter presenters to open fates.
Yeah.
But I did bucksheesh. But I would meet the mums and the kids, and the mums would always get tongue-tied. The kids just knew you off the telly, and you were a mate as far as they were concerned.
Yeah.
But the mums would get tongue-tied, and they would get the words wrong, and they would say, oh, we're so pleased to meet you. You're my son's biggest fan. Now think about that. I would always reply, "Oh, you don't mean that." And they say, no, I really do. You're my son's biggest fan. And I would say, no, you don't mean that.
Yes.
He is my biggest fan. Oh, yeah.
That's lovely. Yeah, you could a fate worse than death.
We used to call
you
them
open-
that. We used to call them fates worse than death. I had a file at home. What's the fate worse? My wife would say, "What's the fate worse than death this Saturday?" On one occasion, I turned up to a school in Godalming to open their fate. And at that time, I drove a three-wheeler van, not unlike the Del Boy Trotter van. Really, I've never been very interested in flash cars, but I had this Reliant super van. It wasn't even a Reliant Robin, it was a Reliant Super Van 2. We drove, my wife and child decided they wanted to come with me. So we
Yes.
drove through the rain to wherever it was, Guildford or something.
God almighty.
Godalming, God awful.
Yes.
We drove to Godalming. I parked up the street a long way from the school because I didn't want them to see that I drove this decrepit old van. Went in, did the fate, signed a few autographs, chatted to the kids,
Yeah.
and I said to the head teacher, "I think we've got to go now." So after a few hours, "I think we've got to go." He said, "Oh no, we don't do things like that. Come on, boys and girls, we'll all go out to see Mr. Harris off." So I said, no, please don't. They all trundled out, and they're looking around for the Daimler or the Jaguar or whatever, or the Rolls, whatever it is I came in. And we tootled up the road and got into this dreadful old van. Because I'd driven there in the rain, I'd left the lights on and the battery was flat. And 3 of the teachers bump started me past the school. And as we're going past, my wife said to me, "Fred, either you get a new car or you get a new wife."
And you were known as Del Boy ever after.
I'm afraid I was.
Oh dear. Well, that's very, very interesting and thoroughly entertaining account
for
of
the
your
boring
life.
bits.
Fred, that was terrific. Lovely,
Well, I don't know what you're gonna
lovely
make of that.
stories. I think we'll make a lot of it. Thank you very much for doing it.
Not at all, David. An absolute pleasure.